And we are back, humans. Yes, hope you like the Bell Biv DeVoe. Now you know. Yo, slick blow. We are back here on WLTH 1370 AM. That is 92.7 on the FM dial. It is 7:27 in the PM here on September the 19th, 2025. Woo, boy, this year went by quick, didn't it? Good Lord. Seemed like it was just like February and March, and here we are in September. And it's almost over. Wow. So anyway, there's been a lot of talk about the catastrophic merging of corporate and governmental powers that seemingly has become undeniable to even the most oblivious of liberals and conservatives. Mussolini had a word for this unholy alliance of government power and private capital. Who knows what it is? It's called fascism. Yes, the merging of government and corporate interest is called fascism, folks. Now, while fascism has always been a part of the American project for a long time, as anybody who grew up black or Native American in America would tell you, that this has always been sort of a fascist state to us, there is no denying that within recent decades there's been an escalation of this project. Now, while many of us may be absolutely terrified of having our lives completely consumed by the fascist state, there's at least one man who would have been absolutely in heaven had he lived to see this. Welcome to history's greatest monsters. Yes, history's greatest monsters. Yes. Who is that man? Well, Lewis Franklin Powell Jr. was born in Suffolk, Virginia in 1907, the son of Mary Lewis and Lewis Franklin Powell Sr. He attended Washington and Lee University, where he became president of his fraternity, managing editor of the student newspaper, and was a member of the yearbook staff. His major was in commerce, but he also studied law and had always planned on becoming a lawyer because he viewed their roles as shaping history. I guess foreshadowing what was to come. He graduated in 1929 with a BA magna cum laude and was Phi Beta Kappa. He then attended Washington and Lee University School of Law in 1331 and graduated as the valedictorian. He also received a Master of Laws degree from Harvard Law School in 1932. During World War II, he first tried to join the United States Navy but was rejected because of poor eyesight, so he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces as an intelligence officer. After receiving his commission as first lieutenant in 1942, he completed his training at bases near Miami. He would advance through the ranks to colonel and receive the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star Medal, and the French Croix de Guerre with a bronze palm. He was discharged from the military in October of 1945. While doing this, he was also serving as the chairman of the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division. Young Mr. Powell was a partner for more than a quarter of a century at Hunton, Williams, Gay, Powell, and Gibson, a large corporate Virginia law firm with its primary offices in Richmond, now known as Hunton Andrews Kurth. Powell practiced primarily in the area of corporate law, especially in the fields of business acquisitions, securities regulation, bankruptcy, and real estate, and railroad litigation. You'll see why all that's very important coming up very soon. From 1961 to 1962, he served as the chair of the American Bar Association's Standing Committee on the Economics of Law Practice, which eventually evolved into the ABA Law Practice Division. He also served on Richmond School Board and was its chairman from 1952 to 1961. Now, this is important because he presided over the school board at a time when Virginia was locked in a campaign of defiance against the Supreme Court's decision of Brown versus Board of Education. So they actually wanted to keep segregation. He represented one of the defiant school districts in Davis versus County School Board of Prince Edward County, which was later consolidated into Brown. Now, all of this essentially led us to the thing that this man is most known for. On August 23rd, 1971, he was commissioned by his neighbor, Eugene B. Sidnor, a close friend and education director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, to write a confidential memorandum for the Chamber entitled Attack on the American Free Enterprise System, an anti-communist, anti-New Deal blueprint for conservative business interests to retake America. Now, see, these people hated FDR. They hated the New Deal. They hated the Great Society because it took power out of the hands of the corporate interests. And we know this is true because the middle of the 20th century is the absolute best period, hell, probably the only decent period that working class people have ever had in this country's history, which is why both parties always talk about we need to go back to the 50s and 60s in certain ways. For conservatives, they want to go back to a time when, you know, basically they could get away with whatever they want to get away with. But a lot of people on the left say, well, we want to go back to a time when labor unions were important and workers made a living wage. Well, this is what they were fighting against. Now, this memo, to be known as the Powell Memo, was based on his reaction to the work of activist Ralph Nader, whose 1965 expose on General Motors' unsafe at any speed put a focus on the auto industry, who had put profit ahead of safety. And this triggered the American consumer movement. So, you know, Ralph Nader, who's still with us, was a thorn in the side to all these car companies. A lot of people don't know that the reason that we have seat belts in all of our cars is because of Ralph Nader. Before Ralph Nader, hundreds of thousands of people would die in car accidents every year. Like, driving cars was extremely dangerous. And it was Ralph Nader who forced the car companies to start putting seat belts in cars. And so for that, the big business fat cats hated and still do hate Ralph Nader. That's one of the reasons why he's, for the last 25 years, he's been basically in exile, and the corporate liberal media blamed him for Al Gore losing in 2000. In spite of the fact that more Democrats voted for George W. Bush in Florida than voted for Ralph Nader. And it's not even close. George W. Bush got more Democrats to vote for him than Ralph Nader got votes total. But yet still, the corporate Democrats and their toadies still to this day blame Ralph Nader. And that is what he gets after a lifetime of fighting back against corporate interest. Basically being cast off and treated as a political pariah. Both parties work for the same team, folks. I tell you that on a weekly basis. They're all on the same team. Just saying. Now, Powell saw it as an undermining of the power of private business and a step towards socialism. There we go again. It's always about being in fear of socialism. His experience as a corporate lawyer and a director on the board of Philip Morris from 1964 until his appointment to the Supreme Court made him look like a champion of the tobacco industry who railed against the growing scientific evidence linking smoking to cancer deaths. So he was representing Philip Morris when it became very obvious that cigarettes were killing people. That was what he did. That was his thing. And I think a lot of people, especially younger people who have not done the research, don't understand that doctors, paid off doctors, literally used to tell people that smoking was healthy for them, that they should smoke cigarettes. And when the evidence started to come out that smoking was causing the deaths of thousands and thousands of people per year, Philip Morris and the cigarette companies fought like crazy. Lewis F. Powell Jr. was one of the people that they used as one of their attack dogs. He argued unsuccessfully that tobacco companies' First Amendment rights were being infringed when news organizations were not giving credence to the cancer denials of the industry. And so he drafted up this memo that argued that corporations had largely been passive in the face of persistent attacks on the free enterprise system coming from college campuses, the media, intellectual, and activists. He warned that this apathy and default of business was jeopardizing the system itself. So you can see why, once again, Donald Trump, what was Donald Trump's first attack? On college students, college campuses. Hell, even the Biden administration were putting snipers on the roof for peaceful anti-Israel or pro-Palestine protesters. They always attack the college campuses first, because that's where free thought happens and all the smart people are. This is why Ronald Reagan, when he was the governor of California, took California from being a relatively free college system to being one of the most expensive in the world. That was done on purpose. Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, saw all the smart people were against the war in Vietnam. And they worried that if young people were too smart, they wouldn't have soldiers to fight their endless wars, especially once the draft ended. And so the only way to remedy this was to make college more cost prohibitive. And so this is why they always focus on college campuses. The media. Again, when Ronald Reagan was president in the 80s, he got rid of the fairness doctrine. This man was on the Supreme Court. Lewis F. Powell was on the Supreme Court when this was happening. The media. Franklin Roosevelt in 1934 had the Telecommunications Act of 1934, which prevented media ownership to be concentrated into too few hands. The right wing spent 5 decades trying to undo that until they got Bill Clinton to do it in the 90s. They're both on the same team, folks. They're all on the same team. They got the Democrat to do it. Bill Clinton signs the Telecommunications Act of 96, and now our media is owned by 5 companies. In 1983, it was 50 companies. 50. Now it's 5. And this is why they can disappear Jimmy Kimmel when they get ready to. And Trump can go out there and say, well, this talk show host is next. Jimmy Fallon is next. Seth Meyers is next. Because there's so few companies that own and control everything. A few people own and control everything. We talked about this last week when Larry Ellison briefly overtook Elon Musk as the richest man alive. His family's buying CBS. They are pro-Trump Zionists who put a literal Israeli propagandist at the head of CBS News named Barry Weiss. You think they're going to let talk show hosts go out there and speak the truth and tell jokes that expose just how corrupt the system is at this point and how corrupt Israel is, or what the atrocities that Israel's doing? Of course not. That's why it's important to understand when you're being played. They're both on the same side. Intellectuals and activists, look at how many activists like Mahmoud Khalil were targeted by the have been targeted by the Trump administration for deportation. People who wrote op-eds. This is the playbook. This is the playbook. Straight out of the Powell Memorandum. To counter these perceived threats, the memo outlined a comprehensive blueprint for political and cultural change, emphasizing long-range strategy, organization, and consistent action. Powell argued that the fragmented efforts by individual companies were insufficient. He advocated for a coordinated effort by the business community, led by organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, to build influence. Now, what were the strategies they used? The memo proposed specific actions for corporations and their allies to influence public opinions and policy. In academia, they were to hire pro-business scholars, fund departments and research center, and pressure universities to ensure a more balanced perspective on capitalism in curricula and lectures. So you see right now the Trump administration literally just came out last week and said that they want to force universities to at least hire half conservatives. In the media, aggressively monitor news coverage and demand equal time to present the business perspective, particularly on television. They don't want equal time. That's why they got rid of the fairness doctrine, which guaranteed equal time. No, they want propaganda, corporate propaganda. And that's what the media is. The mainstream corporate media is nothing but propaganda. That's why I tell you every week, turn it off. In politics and the courts, increase lobbying efforts and actively cultivate political power. Powell saw the judiciary as the most important instrument for social and economic change and urged business interests to engage in strategic litigation. Think tanks. Create and fund new think tanks and other organizations to generate and promote research that supports the free enterprise system. So you see that in like the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation and all, who wrote Project 2025. You would not have Project 2025, which has really just been the same thing that the right has been publishing for the last 40 years with a new name, if it was not for the Powell memo. This was a part of the strategy. Stockholders. Mobilize the political power of millions of stockholders to support educational and political programs. This is how you end up with stuff like PragerU, who preached that slavery wasn't all that bad. Literally, that's what they're teaching kids, that slavery wasn't all that bad and that it was better than being killed. I wish they would have told that to all the slaves who literally chose to jump off of the slave ships and die in the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean rather than be held captive as slaves. So many slaves jumped off slave ships that to this day, sharks still congregate in those spots in the Atlantic Ocean because they expect more chum. They expect more human bodies to eat. To this day, that's how many slaves jumped to their deaths in the Atlantic Ocean. But PragerU teaches that slavery, well, you know, slavery was better than being killed. The legacy of the Powell Memorandum is credited by many as a significant catalyst for the modern conservative movement. It inspired people like Charles and David Koch, the Koch brothers, who later built an extensive network of think tanks and lobbying groups, including the Democratic Leadership Council, started by Bill and Hillary Clinton in the 80s. They literally started the DLC because their stance was that the Democratic Party had gone too far to the left. And so we see what 40 years of the DLC has done to the modern corporate liberal Democratic Party. Institutional expansion. In the decades following the memo, business political engagement has surged. The number of corporate political action committees, PACs, and registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C. has increased dramatically. And new conservative think tanks like the Heritage Foundation were founded. The Heritage Foundation was founded in 1973, 2 years after the memo. The Cato Institute, 1977, 6 years after the memo. The American Enterprise Institute, that was revitalized in the 1970s. These organizations became engines for producing policy papers, op-eds, and legal arguments. Powell emphasized that businesses should politically influence systematically. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce dramatically expanded its Washington presence in the 70s, and political action committees proliferated. Corporate PACs grew from fewer than 300 in 1976 to over 1,200 by the mid-1980s. The influence on law and courts has been immense. His call for more corporate involvement in the legal arena inspired support from groups like the Federalist Society, which was founded in 1982, which has since shaped the judiciary by promoting conservative legal thought. So we have a conservative right-wing court right now, partially inspired by this memo, the Powell Memo from 1971. And maybe most importantly, it shaped the Reagan Revolution. The ideas in the Powell Memo fed into the intellectual and political climate that created Ronald Reagan's political movement. Deregulation, tax cuts, weakened labor unions, and skepticism of government intervention, all things that have been hallmarks of the New Deal, of the Great Society, of the most prosperous time America's working class had ever had. Those days are far gone. It also laid groundwork for later movements to roll back environmental and consumer protections, protecting our air and water. He was also instrumental in helping organize the court's pro-corporate reconstruction of the First Amendment, which culminated in Citizens United, which said that money is speech, that corporations have speech just as much as we are. So we have to treat corporations like they are people, even though corporations in theory, can't be given a death penalty. He joined the court's seminal 1967 ruling in Buckling Vallejo v. Vallejo, which equated money in the form of campaign expenditures with free speech. So that was a precursor to Citizens United. You know, there's actually this website that I like to go to. It's called WTF, or What the Bleep Happened in 1971, right? It's called WTF Happened in 1971.com. Anybody can look it up. And it just goes down the list of all the things that have gotten worse in this country since 1971. Like worker pay not keeping up with productivity. That starts in 1971. Income gains not being shared with workers and basically only going to the wealthy. That trend starts in 1971. Income concentration at the top rising sharply starts in 1971. Income share of the top 1% relative to the bottom 90%. That starts spiraling out of control in 1971. Real GDP per capita and median male income, the decoupling of that starts in 1971. America becoming a nation of dual income working couples starts in 1971. At least it starts to, should I say, go up in 1971. You can even look at stuff like inflation, cumulative inflation. It starts to go up drastically in 1971. Man, this is incredible. Real house prices. You start to see real house prices and rents started to go up around 1971. The amount of time it takes to save for a house started to drastically go up post 1971. In 1970, it took you 2.5 years to save for a house to buy. By 1980, it was almost 4 years. By 1990, it was 5 years. By 2000, it was 7 years, which is where it stayed. So there you have it, folks. One of history's greatest monsters, Lewis F. Powell Jr., a man who was never a president, never a king, but nonetheless had an outsized influence on everything that has happened in our society the last 50 years.